Hello and welcome to today's Insight Live. I'm Jason Rader and I'll be your host today as we talk about AI of some sort or AI readiness for modern work. I've got two great guys with me today. They're going to help me carry on this conversation. We've got the ever-present Carm Tagliente, our Chief Data Officer and Distinguished Engineer. Welcome, Carm.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
And we've got Joe Flynn, another Distinguished Engineer who's a Director here in our Modern Workplace environment at Insight. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Jason.
So, of some sort. Sorry, I had to poke a little fun there. But when we're talking about AI, and we were just sitting in the green room for about 15 minutes before we got started today, and we had a lot of interesting topics come up that we hadn't kind of thought about up until this point. But when we're talking about workplace AI and getting readiness related to that, what are we talking about when we say workplace AI? As of distinguishing that from non-workplace AI. Who wants to give that one a shot?
Joe, I'll let you go first, and then I'll kind of give it a broader definition, but this is kind of your space, so I'd love to hear your perspective.
So to me, workplace AI is everything tied. So if you think of the end users within the workforce, right, tied to the workplace, anything they're using business data, business processes, and trying to wrap AI into it to try to be more efficient, try to be faster. What I tell everyone is trying to not start from ground zero. That's the whole purpose of AI, is getting you to where you need to be a lot faster. But I think the key difference I talk to customers about is separating work data, work processes, work needs, and then anything outside of that, I think would be tied to the other half. Carm, thoughts on add-on?
Yeah, I'll just extend it a little bit. And the way I think about it in maybe a little bit broader sense, but you covered it as well. But it's really just AI-enabled applications, or I like to call them intelligent applications. And so how can we use AI, not to magically do our job for us, but it's to help us to make better decisions and to really allow us to think critically about the decisions that we do make and make them for the right reasons. And I think AI can really contribute to that. And it really will change the dynamic of the workforce over time, because I think organizations, as they start to trust AI more, they will start to rely on this embedding into our applications, whether it's commercial applications or custom applications. I think we'll start seeing a lot more of that in the future.
Love it. And I think from a security perspective, it is important to kind of carve out, to Joe's earlier point, the workplace appropriate data versus the, and certainly if we have client data or other regulated data, compartmentalizing that appropriately, which is something that folks are realizing they have to think a little bit more about these days when they're trying to leverage AI.
For sure. Yeah, the interesting thing about that, Jason, is, and I know this is really not a topic around, or at least the topic shouldn't be around data only, but that sort of data gravity thing is front and center. So it's sort of it's the securitization, it's the authorized use, it's the exposure, it's the using it for decision making, it's governance, it's quality. It's like, wow, it's like it's all right in the center, and that's the corporate asset, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, what we find, and if we look at Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365, we're leveraging the data that's in the Microsoft cloud. And what people don't realize is we as humans, right? Everyone loves to share a document, whether it's on their OneDrive or something, to an organization. And that's the problem. And now we're oversharing. And I think the AI, so there's that data governance, data estate piece is top of mind for here. And it's for everywhere, right? Whether it's non-work or work-related. Work-related is just as important, because you're going to have confidential documents and other things that unfortunately people overshare.
Completely agree. I think, that's one of those things. I love the M365 platform in general, but having a whole bunch of stuff in SharePoint and then realizing that, wow, that whole security by obscurity was really how we were kind of going about things. But using things like Delve or other things like that kind of make you think a little bit, oh, wow, I'm seeing everything that this person's working on, or those kinds of things. But yeah, having some kind of classification, labeling scheme within your organization, training your users on it. It is kind of one of those things, and we weren't planning on talking about this, Carm, but you got me going now, is that when we try to embrace these newer technologies, sometimes we get a false start and we have to kind of back up and fix some stuff, or we could be in trouble from a regulatory, legal, all kinds of other things. And sometimes that false start, even though it was all a good idea to fix it, you go back and fix it, you kind of lost that momentum and a little bit of the hype and maybe a little bit of trust from your user base.
Yeah, for sure. I think the, it is interesting because, like you're saying, knowing what data you have, I think is really probably the one challenge. Like many organizations don't realize in sort of those hidden corners of the SharePoint sites, there's data there that maybe was not classified or categorized, but being able to access it and use it. So sort of from a defensive posture perspective, and also from a value perspective, because I think at the end of the day, if I'm working on something within the org, let's say I'm trying to determine how I should create a new portfolio offering in the portfolio, I may use a series of documents that I might take, and some of them might be, say, internally confidential or something. We can't really talk about it, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to have access to those still, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I can protect it if it's something that perhaps is confidential to the customer that we might have been working with at the end of the day. But I'll tell you from a productivity perspective, though, in general, I mean, I think while there's a counterbalance here, right? We want people to be productive, but we also want to make sure we're protecting those assets. But I can't tell you how many times I've been to the SharePoint site and done SharePoint search, and I'm not bashing Microsoft SharePoint at all, but it's like I can't find anything. So I just recreate it all. And so it really is problematic. And I think today, though, when you create the kind of environment, using a RAG strategy or augmentation through, your cognitive services or knowledge base, you can find that stuff. And it's pretty amazing. So I think in that case, you can really be super productive. But to your point, it's like somebody also has to kind of take that fine-grained approach to say that data is really great, but should it be classified or categorized as something else that we might want to protect?
Yeah. No, and I think to your point, it is well worth getting it sorted out. I mean, I think the productivity won from leveraging AI, from the Copilot perspective, from all the perspectives that we've talked about on the show and probably will continue to talk about. It's a game changer. It really does. Especially, I mean, I think back in the day, we were used to making decisions based on, kind of our own knowledge base, right? Now we can literally get data that, would have been impossible to compile, 5 years ago. So it's one of those things. And then making an educated decision based on real data instead of a gut feeling and a little bit of data is way better all day long.
For sure.
So Joe, and we don't want to say any numbers or anything on this, but I know we're helping lots and lots of clients kind of figure this stuff out. And are there some steps that you're kind of helping people kind of figure this out from a readiness perspective, and maybe the question really is, are people kind of enabling all their folks with this, or are they just kind of teasing them with a couple of core groups? Give me a little bit of a background on how you're doing that with our clients.
Yeah, so from our side, if everyone knows, Microsoft shifted how they license, at least Copilot for Microsoft 365 as of January 16th. You could buy one license, right? We saw a drastic shift in how people are buying licenses now. Now we see the 5 to 10 licenses. People are trying it out. What we're noticing, and it's apparent across many customers, is IT's the one testing it out, not the business. I'll be honest with you, right? There's Copilot for security, IT tool, right? There's Copilot tools out there for IT, but Copilot for Microsoft 365, not an IT tool. It's an end user tool. It's a productivity tool. It's the Office apps. And that's what we tell users is if you buy 10, give 8 to the business, 2 for IT, because IT's going to have to support it. They're going to have to see what's out there from a security, compliance, regulatory, supportability standpoint. But in turn, the business has to determine where the value is for them. And when it gets to the business, that's where we talk. And it's going to be on Carm, your side too. It's about use cases. What are the use cases that are going to give you the best value for how you're going to use this? It's not meant for everybody. I don't see Copilot being licensed for everybody in our org. It's not even licensed for everybody in our org. But when we had extra licenses from an Insight perspective, we were very specific and strategic on who we licensed it to based on the use case or personas that would get the most value out of it.
Totally. Right.
I mean, I think we saw.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
No, I'm just going to talk about sort of this evolution model. I mean, it literally is a disruptive innovation. So businesses are transforming like everyone else is, within our society, and it's sort of the adoption of this really stems from the fact that we have to learn how to use it most effectively, and organizations are the same way. So, if you, to Joe's point, if you just stand back and say, hey, we're 13,000 people in the company, let's buy licenses for all 13,000. well, there probably aren't a lot of people that A, are going to know how to use it initially, or B, maybe require some training. So you really want to start with, I'll call it a small group. And I'm not saying 5 is, the right size or anything like that, but it's sort of small enough to start to develop some momentum, understand what the real use cases might be across the board, and then sort of build that into your workflow processes or into your culture or community of the organization. And I think that's probably a more practical approach to this, like the adoption of any new technology.
That's fair. I mean, I think from my understanding from an internal insight perspective, I mean, I think we had a huge hit with our developers. Those guys were, Copilot for GitHub was a gigantic leap from a productivity perspective. I mean, I can see huge value there. So there are definitely some, and the security side, I know that that's kind of in new or, just coming out. I think that that's going to, when it hits its momentum, I think it's going to really be good because there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, some of the things that you do from a security perspective, documentation and those things, just being able to document incidents and those kinds of things really is a quality of life thing that is like game changing from that perspective. And I think we have a lot of marketing folks that really, really love the aspects of Copilot. I mean, our warehouse workers probably could care less, so it's one of those things, you've got to figure out the right demographics, if you will, of your org and target them. And I think there's also targeted products like even though I think in general, Copilot can gen code for you, that's not the right tool to give to your developers. You know what I'm saying? So you've got to find the right tool for the right job.
Right.
Well said.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe I'll just shift into a little bit of the accuracy component of this, because when we think about large language models, they're really probabilistic in the way that they work. And as much as we may believe that it's sentient kind of environment, it realistically is a word by word generator based off of patterns that are in our language, which is by itself an amazing thing. So the fact that it works the way it does is truly amazing. But I think there's also this concept of trust but verify. So it's when we talk about the impact on the business or the culture of the organization, I think it also has to do with make sure that you use it to understand what maybe the result would be, but then verify that what you expected it to be. And I think the inclination, and I'm not making too broad of a generalization here, but I think in a lot of ways, there are some people that are just like, oh, it's just going to do my job. It's going to auto generate for me and I'm done. But it's not really intended to do that yet. And we can get into the utopian world if you want as well, but or dystopian, depending on how you want to look at it. But this is the model where first it starts as an augmentation to what humans can do, and I think maybe at some point we trust it enough to really enable workflows more effectively. Yeah,
I like that. And we talked about like the workplace readiness, but there's the workforce readiness aspects as well, right? So, getting your workforce, there are some people that are like, oh, this is going to take my job. Well, we haven't found that it takes people's jobs yet. What we've found is that, people who are hesitant to embrace the technology because they are afraid of that aren't going to get any value out of it. So it's one of those things where I think we've got to not just, and this is what a good organization is going to help you figure out, is it's not just the tech that you've got to, get entitlements to your users. It's also, you got to get your users trained and help them understand the benefits of how this can be leveraged. And I think your point's very, very important, is working this into a workflow. It doesn't just do a job. You've got to figure out what the workflow is and how it's leveraged within that environment. That's when you really get the most out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of like it, and I'm not really comparing it to the cloud, but to your point, Jason, I'm 100% behind that, because I think in a lot of ways, while we can say that, okay, we're not going to take any jobs by doing this, but it's pretty certain that the negative, the counter argument is true. If you resist it and you say, I'm not going to learn that, there's no way, you probably will lose your job. So maybe the counter argument is maybe more valid in this particular case, because, leaning in and leveraging these capabilities, I think, is just the way that businesses are going to head in the future. I think that's pretty clear today.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, right, you'll be more productive. You'll be able to get things done faster. And that's what I think that's what people are going to look for, right? Is how much can they get out of someone ultimately throughout the course of their whatever 7-8 hour day that they possibly are working, if not longer.
Yeah, for sure. It was funny this morning. It's not really workplace involved, but it kind of is. So I was teaching a course this morning, and we were talking about the concept of linearity and linearity independence. And I was like, oh my God, this is like linear algebra from way back when. So I tried to use GitHub for Copilot and write some Python code that allowed me to be able to figure out what it actually was. And I couldn't really find a good example, but I went to OpenAI and I did with explanations. And I was like, holy cow, this is pretty amazing in terms of productivity, because I would have wasted half a day trying to just go back to my linear algebra and figure out what it really meant, linear independence and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, long story short is the benefits are really kind of amazing. And if you lean into it, you can be super productive. And to your point earlier, Jason, I think it's also use the right tool for the job. Or if that tool doesn't work, explore, maybe you can find the answer in another, AI tool or some other capability.
Indeed. Sometimes I put on my business person hat, because we've got definitely some business folks that watch these sessions. And, the question comes up is, okay, all this productivity, guys, we're paying for this. Are we getting more stuff done? What's that percentage look like? Are we taking out head count? Whatever the metrics that the company uses to figure out how well they're doing, they typically want to see some correlation related to the amount of money they're spending. Are you running into those kinds of things and those kinds of discussions as well?
Yeah,
Joe, you probably see it every day.
Yeah, because like you said, you both said it, right? It's not cheap. I mean, whether you're looking at Copilot for Microsoft 365, or if you, let's say Azure, OpenAI and Azure, right, from a consumption standpoint, or just other AI things, it's expensive. And at what point, I mean, if you're looking at from a C-level resource, looking at the finances, I'm going to be possibly spending a few $1 million. What am I getting in return? Is it revenue? We always say your users can be more productive. They can get things done faster. But I'm finding in those conversations, it's hard to prove that, because it's soft ROI, right? You're saying you could be more productive, but is the person taking advantage of being more productive is the other side of that.
We get longer lunches. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want to, one thing that I have been seeing, and I've customers have told me this as well, but in the business people don't want to hear this, but it's the qualitative aspects of the productivity. So instead of me having to go search SharePoint for 3 hours and figure this out, it's like my job is easier. It's like, could I measure the productivity in terms of quantitative value to the organization? Maybe not, but I'm a heck of a lot happier and I like my job. So does that turn into productivity or savings, within the organization? Probably.
It helps you retain top talent, which is definitely one of our mission goals, right? Yeah. So I do think that we're not good as normal employees before AI got here of kind of quantifying our value every day. So it's hard for when we flip a switch like this to do that, and then to say how little of me you need to allocate. That's a hard thing to do. I don't think we're good at that kind of behavior just yet. But I definitely think, as we're scoping, from a consultant perspective, if I were scoping a job that's a development job and I was able to leverage, Copilot for GitHub, I would estimate my hours to be less because of something like that. So it's one of those things where, there are ways in places where you're measuring man hours and those kinds of things for those kinds of things. It's easier to do, but it's hard for a workforce in general. And, I think just the three of us, we're all kind of do similar smart people stuff for our work, but we totally do different things. And it'd be hard to quantify kind of against each other what's right. So it's a weird situation. I think it's going to come around, but I do think it's probably going to be, the business will probably expect to hire less moving forward, as opposed to kind of get rid of folks that are currently in roles. But I don't even know about that. I think typically when organizations invest in general, they expect to get a return, right? So that return should be taking share, us being able to be in front of customers more. Those are the kinds of things that we really, and then we can measure those things.
One thing that was brought up internally, and this is more talking about because my side, modern work, being the Copilot side, is employee experience. So like a manager specifically told me, like the benefit he got out of it from using Copilot is when he has his one-on-ones or has meetings and has Copilot take the notes, he's more engaged, he's more connected to the employee. But then if you look at it from a customer standpoint, right, being able to host meetings with a customer and have it take the notes and the task list and the follow-up items for you, now you're listening, you're potentially engaged more with the customer. So from a customer satisfaction experience, but again, hard to prove out, but those are use cases at the same time that are not only just productive, but it's also the experience piece that you can merge with it.
Yeah. I do have to say, man, that part of Teams where they can just summarize a meeting, that is chef's kiss, man. That is one of the greatest things ever. Not that I don't pay attention, but having a whole bunch of notes on something is, I don't always have my notebook with me. There's all those things, and to have it nicely summed up, be able to remind you and to actually set things, dates and meetings and follow-ups is fantastic.
I just wanted to comment on the point you were making earlier, Jason, about sort of quantifying productivity enhancements. So, and I'm only getting a little bit of this right now, but I think ultimately it's going to be when we talk to customers about, say, consulting engagement where we're going to do some development work, et cetera, they are like very critical of the estimate, and they're like, well, why can't you just use AI to do all of that work? Why do you need 10 developer or whatever? So I think what that's going to do, at least I'm speculating, is that it's going to force us to sort of become more transparent about what is the real quantitative benefit of this, so that we can measure effectively and then be transparent with our customers about it. It's like, we know we're going to get 30% improvement, and we've already factored that in to what we're doing, because I think customers understanding that it's going to be a real important part to how we think about development in the future.
I think that is very key. And I do know we do that. So that's, there are certain aspects of the process that can be easily shortened because of AI, but then there are other parts of that, interviewing people and figuring all the meetings and those kinds of things that aren't going to be shortened because there's people involved and it's not all just straight to code. Otherwise, people use AI to develop their own stuff and they wouldn't need us in general. But
right.
I do see a lot of people doing that, which is awesome. I think we don't want to have the jobs that you could have done yourself. We want the bigger solutions that have a huge amount of integration, those kinds of things. I think it really empowers folks, but I think the fact that we're transparent about that and we want to leverage the tools and make them aware of it, it makes everybody better. But that's a good point.
Yeah, and I'll call out the elephant in the room, and not just because I'm the CDO, but it's basically the data. I think what we will see, or what we're seeing actually now, is the fact that it's the quality, the integrity, the trustworthiness of the data, the value, if you want to call it that, is going to be the primary mechanism that drives the productivity we're talking about, or the decision-making ability that we're talking about. So I think there is a lot of work there now, because I think many organizations have, again, not blaming anybody, but we've always kicked the can down the road. Back in the early BI days in reporting, we were just like, yeah, data warehouses, those are really nice, but yeah, we'll get around to quality later. And we never really kind of fixed it, but now it's almost required. If you're going to use it in this way, we have to really address those challenges as we move forward.
Data hygiene is going to be absolutely critical, right? Because bad data in is ultimately going to give you bad data out.
Yeah, and only it'll sound more believable than it did in the past.
The beautiful thing, though, is kind of what I already alluded to, like in the data that we're getting now, that we're collecting as of implementing these features in some of the Microsoft platforms and things like that, we have really great data moving forward. So we actually, if we did want to get to a more quantitative, I know there's some fantastic instrumentation in, is it the Engage platform or the Viva platform, Joe, that shows some really good, you want to see how much people are working or integrating or doing that kind of stuff. When I've seen that data, it's like, wow, that's a lot of really cool stuff that you can, get some quantification related to productivity, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the hard part with the data, and Carmen, that's where I think the OpenAI side is probably better use case in some instances. Is like from a Copilot perspective, there's a lot of times it may source emails and chats, which probably not the data you want to source if you're looking for information
Not
on
mine.
some of the things. So I think it's where's the source of that data, not only data hygiene, I think is going to be really crucial going forward.
Yeah. I think the RAG aspect, so the retrieval augmented generation is what RAG stands for, right? What it means to me is, hey, you get to put your own data somewhere that we leverage that data as part of the process for generating the response. That, back to your point, Carm, where we've got to have the data that we want to leverage that against needs to be tight. But I think that's the big game changer, as opposed to maybe going externally or just going only to any kind of GPT, leveraging that. And I think that's the hotness that a lot of organizations, and part of the readiness that those organizations need to figure out. We kind of alluded to it. But that is where, I see a huge amount of value for, making you talked about experience for our users, but making the experience for our clients even better. Like here, hey, we work for Insight. I'm just using Insight as an example, but hey, we work for Insight. Let me give you the standard PowerPoint presentation that we use, or let me get one generated specifically for you by my system that can do that can see what types of things we've done with you before, that can look at my email. That would be a way better client experience when you leverage that, which is something that would take a team of people a long time to do. And by the way, I've been in this business long enough to have had those teams that every time I went to a meeting, I get like a brief of here's everything we've ever done. Here's all the people we've talked to. And that's just a huge amount of work. And I look at it for like 15 seconds. But it's one of those things where now we can have some really great stuff gen from legit data that's ours. I think that's a massive, again, back to quality of life, back to quality of service, and the quality of the product, the solution that we're delivering. That's a game changer there.
Yeah, I think I think what's in sort of back ending what you're talking about is a degree by which you can measure the accuracy of that knowledge base. Because I think in order to do those things that you're describing, which are truly amazing, you want to figure out a way to have confidence in those results. So
Sure.
At some level, and we're starting to see this now quite a bit, actually. So there's observability tools that are starting to now appear that that could tell you what was the accuracy of my RAG strategy, or basically what was the accuracy of the data that I provided to the GPT in order to be able to be more effective. And if it's high, then I have more, and I had simple, correlation. If it's high, I probably have more confidence than if it's low, meaning that I didn't really find any knowledge that would help in that particular case. But today we just use a very simple, finger in the wind strategy. It's like either it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But there's, mathematical ways that we can use to say, hey, we actually found a hit in the database or in the cognitive services environment vector database that says, yeah, you found some really good data, and I have confidence in that. So I think we'll get there too, in terms of trustworthiness and responsible AI and et cetera, which I don't want to open a whole nother can of worms around responsible AI, but in general, I think this, sort of it all is tying together at the end of the day.
Speaking of data, I always make the mistake. We have a fantastic survey that goes out, and for you folks out there that contribute to that, we really appreciate it. We love it when you answer it. Our one that we sent out for this show is, how is your organization currently investing in AI? I don't know if you guys saw the results yet, but I will present them at this point. So 42% say productivity tools, 32% data and analytics, 11% automation, and 16% security and governance. So, and I would have probably pegged that pretty much exactly like that. I would have thought data analytics would have actually been the top, but it was in the top two. But I do think that productivity tools, probably the reason so many people answered positively there was because of the Copilot and how, that kind of stuff is really in a lot of folks' face. Maybe they were not so aware of how the analytics on the back end is being leveraged. Joe, I know from a Copilot perspective, we're seeing loads and loads of stuff come up on that. Do you have any predictions for what's going to, from a productivity perspective? I know you get to see some of the secret stuff that not everybody.
I feel I'm probably similar to Carm. I think I've been living Copilot 24/7 every day for the past 8, 9, 10 months. The conversations have increased drastically. So you're right. It's everywhere. It was even in the Super Bowl commercial. Let's be honest, right? They actually had a commercial about it in the Super Bowl, which is first in a while for, you figure, a Microsoft productivity or software type product. But I mean, where it's going to go? I still think has some maturing to do. I think we see changes on a weekly basis. So the amount of investment going in it is insane. So it's even hard for us to keep up with. That's how much it changes. We saw drastic improvements from just mid-January when they went to GPT-4 and from a Copilot perspective. So it's absolutely I think it's going to be a game changer for sure as we mature. I mean, obviously there's tools like you said, Teams, Notes, and you figure Word and Outlook, slam dunks. But if you look at things like Excel and those tools, they still got some growing up to do to be pretty useful in those senses. Or I think if you're getting into that world, I mean, think about it. Microsoft just released Copilot for finance. So if you think of it's probably very specific to connecting to SAP or Dynamics or things like that. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of those type of Copilots come out, or their Copilot for service are released tied to contact centers. You have Copilot for security, which you mentioned. We're going to start seeing other Copilots come out that are going to be geared towards specific systems.
All right. And the bomb question at the end. So I mentioned this in the green room and I said I might not ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So it takes a lot of processing to do AI, right? And, when we think about Bitcoin mining and electricity requirements and those kinds of things, and then we also think about being responsible from a carbon footprint and those kinds of things. Do we think that how about this? What do you think about that moving forward, Carm? I mean, being really conscious about this, but also I think we all really understand the processing that's involved on the back end. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you maybe 3 perspectives as we go through this. So the first perspective is, I think if we continue along the same path that we've been on, eventually we'll hit a wall, right, at some point. So it's like we can keep creating bigger and bigger large language models and training them with more data, which is really where a lot of the consumption comes in. But the number of parameters that we use, or the size of the neural network makes inference also more costly. So, you can only have so much richness before you're going to sort of hit a bit of a wall. And there may be sort of diminishing returns over time. So, potentially, if I use, I don't know, make it up, sort of 20 trillion parameters, is that going to be better than my 10 trillion parameter environment? Maybe not. So that's still a debate. So number one is, I think it's probably going to be something related to, how do we sort of understand where the end is? What's good enough? So figure out where to stop. So that might help control this a little bit. Number 2 is related to just understanding not everybody has to train a model. So like I bump into customers and like, oh, we got to make our own model. It's like, do you? Why don't you use a service, or a RAG strategy is a really good one for particular use cases. There may be cases where you want to train or maybe tune an existing model, but you may not need your own. So, that's another one. So you may not need the horsepower that we're talking about, at least for training purposes. Inference is a different thing. And then I think number 3 is, I think the approach might change over time as well. So I think we might move to more of a cognitive-based approach instead of or graph-based approach, where we define knowledge as sort of relationships between nodes, kind of like the way we, I guess, or at least we speculate that that's the way the brain works. So instead of doing next word probabilistic guessing, which is how a large language model works today, we'll do more real reasoning. And I think it's a different model approach. So, and that takes a lot less compute, actually, to be able to do that from an inference and training perspective. So one of those 3, maybe.
Well, none of those sounded like, if we keep going at the rate that we're going, oh, you did say we're going to hit the wall at a certain point. So it's just not going to give us the return that we expected. And then that equals people aren't going to pay for it. And then they're not going to do it as much anymore. Okay, that's fair.
Sure.
But yeah, it is something that we can't not think about, is all the power generation that's out there. Any final words from you, Joe, based on folks? Because, you know, from a more practical approach than the theoretical stuff that we're talking about here, where, you know, is there a place that you would suggest from a readiness perspective folks get started at?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking from a modern workplace or digital workplace type of readiness for Copilot, I think if we look at the pandemic, right, we've shifted to a hybrid workforce. A lot of customers, a lot of people in general, right, didn't think of security from that aspect, and they came back really fast, realizing the issues from a security perspective. I think those Copilots are a great productivity tool to get users more productive, but you have to think about security in the same context. And it's about compliance, it's data state, data governance, it's security, even from a zero trust framework at the endpoint side. Because if a user ends up, one customer said this to us, right? It was a government customer. Like, I love the aspects of Copilot, but then if my user gets breached in some way that someone can use their credentials, now that person has access via Copilot to everything. Right. So as productive as it is, it does open those doors. So again, tell customers, user personas, use cases, adoption, and security should be the four main things you really have to think about when going to a Copilot type of work. It works around, right? I was a naysayer in the beginning because I fell into the whole marketing hype of how it should work. And when I got my hands on it, I was like, it's not as good as it shows. But then as we live it and we're using it, it's like it's improving constantly. So the value has increased. So I've definitely changed my tone on that sense. But again, security side of it is a conversation and the thought process that's wrapped into my mind every day I use it.
Love it. Well, gentlemen, thank you. It's been fun. And thank you guys out there for your support, for your questions that you asked, for your comments. We appreciate those. We're going to probably have to have part 2 and 3 of this because it seems like there's a lot more to talk about. If you want to know more about what we do here at Insight, please visit us at insight.com. And thanks for joining us for today's Insight Live. Cheers.
Thanks
Guys.